I used to believe I had the perfect marriage. For 15 years, I trusted my husband with my heart, my family, and my future. He was the person I called when I was afraid, the person I leaned on when life became difficult. So when strange things started happening, appointments I didn't remember making, conversations I couldn't recall, and growing doubts about my own memory, I blamed myself. I thought I was stressed. I thought I was overwhelmed. I thought something was wrong with me. But the truth was far more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. Because the man I trusted most wasn't helping me hold my life together. He was quietly tearing it apart. And the day I discovered a hidden folder on his laptop with my name on it, everything I thought I knew about my marriage changed forever.
Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Rebecca, and I'm a financial analyst for a pharmaceutical company in Connecticut. When people ask me what my life looked like 5 years ago, I tell them it was the kind of life you see in magazines. A beautiful colonial house in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew everyone. A husband named David who owned a successful real estate development company. 2 teenage children who seemed well-adjusted, happy even. We had date nights on Fridays. We took vacations to Martha's Vineyard. My friends envied us, or at least that's what they said. Looking back now, I understand that envy was based on a fiction, a carefully constructed performance that David had been directing for years. The thing about being married to someone for a long time is that you stop questioning the small inconsistencies. You stop noticing when someone is reshaping your perception of reality because the changes happen so gradually that you think it's you changing, not them manipulating you. That's what I want to warn you about today. That's why I'm telling this story. It happened on a Tuesday in March, when I received a call from my Obgyn's office asking about my appointment that afternoon. I hadn't scheduled an appointment. I told the receptionist there must be a mistake, but she assured me that the appointment was under my name and had been confirmed twice. My heart sank because I knew I had a board meeting that afternoon that I'd been preparing for weeks. I called David immediately. He picked up on the first ring, which was unusual because he was typically in meetings. He sounded strange when I told him about the appointment. There was this pause, and then he said softly that he'd scheduled it because he was worried about me. He'd noticed I'd been stressed and thought I should check in with the doctor. Something in his voice made me feel guilty for being upset. I apologized for my tone, thanked him, and rescheduled my board meeting. Only later did I wonder how he'd gotten my doctor's number and known exactly when to call. I didn't think to question that then. I should have. After that day, things began multiplying. I would plan a lunch with a friend, only to have that friend text me asking if I was okay because I canceled an hour before. I never canceled anything. I found invoices for deliveries that never arrived at our house. A new medication in my name arrived at the pharmacy that my doctor swore I never requested. David always had an explanation. He was helping me manage my calendar because I was overwhelmed. He'd accidentally used my name instead of his when ordering office supplies. Maybe the pharmacy made a mistake with the prescription. Each explanation was reasonable. Each one made me doubt my own memory a little bit more. I started keeping a notebook. I documented everything. Every missed appointment. Every wrong charge. Every conversation that didn't line up. I felt like I was losing my mind, and in a strange way that fear kept me from telling anyone. What if they thought I was being paranoid? What if I was going crazy and didn't know it? David was so patient with me during those months. He'd hold my hand and tell me that maybe I should see a therapist. He suggested gentle things, a meditation app, less wine at dinner, more sleep. He was the picture of a concerned husband, and I was the picture of an unraveling woman. The truth was hidden in plain sight the entire time. I found the laptop in his office closet on a Friday when I was looking for winter clothes that I thought we'd stored there. It was an older model, the kind he said he'd thrown out years ago. When I opened it, there were passwords, but David had written them down on a sticky note inside the desk drawer. That's something that's haunted me since. Was it a mistake, or did he want me to find it? I'll never know. Inside that laptop was a folder labeled Rebecca Finances. When I clicked it open, I saw years of documentation, bank statements from accounts I never knew existed opened in my name, credit cards with my signature forged on the applications, emails from lawyers discussing power of attorney documents that apparently I'd signed but never had. There were recordings too, audio files of conversations between David and someone else, a woman's voice I didn't recognize. They were discussing my mental state. They were talking about medications. They were making plans about placing me in a facility if my behavior continued to deteriorate. My legs gave out. I sank onto the floor of his office closet, and I read and listened to my entire life being systematically dismantled by the person I'd trusted most. The word betrayal doesn't quite capture what you feel in that moment. It's bigger than betrayal. It's a complete reordering of everything you thought you knew. Over the next several hours, I went through every file on that laptop. I needed to understand the full extent of what was happening. The accounts he'd opened in my name totaled over $400,000. Money had been flowing in from the sale of properties that he claimed were his, but I later learned were investments we'd made together from my family. Inheritance. The woman's voice in the recordings belonged to someone named Catherine, and from the context of their conversations, she appeared to be a psychiatrist or someone with medical credentials. They discussed medications by name. They talked about getting me declared incompetent. They referenced conversations with our bank about managing my assets. There were emails detailing a plan to move everything I owned into trust structures that would give David control, even if I somehow maintained legal competency. The timeline of the scheme went back further than I initially thought, at least 7 years. Every major illness I'd had, every moment of forgetfulness, every instance where I'd questioned my own sanity had been carefully orchestrated. I sat in that dark closet for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 30 minutes, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to tell anyone, not yet. If I was going to survive this, I needed to be smarter than he was. I drove to a small office building 30 miles away from our town and found a private investigator named Marcus Green. He came highly recommended through a woman at my work who'd gone through a difficult divorce. When I laid out what I'd found, Marcus didn't look shocked. He looked like a man who had seen this exact scenario many times before. He told me that what David was doing had a name: financial abuse, psychological abuse, medical abuse. He explained that the woman Catherine was likely being paid or had some other stake in the scheme. Marcus told me something I needed to hear. He said that leaving now, without evidence that would hold up in court, would be dangerous. David had positioned himself as the reasonable one, managing the finances of an increasingly unstable wife. If I disappeared or tried to run, he could paint me as a mentally ill woman who'd abandoned her family. He could use the forged documents and the false accounts as proof of my erratic behavior. I would lose everything: my house, my children, my freedom. So Marcus and I created a plan. I would go back to being the wife David expected. The forgetful one, the anxious one, the one who needed his help. But this time, I would be documenting everything he did. I would be gathering evidence that a court couldn't ignore. For the next 4 weeks, I lived a double life. At home, I was the increasingly confused woman David had been creating. I'd ask him the same question twice. I'd pretend I didn't remember conversations we'd had. I'd look lost and overwhelmed when he suggested solutions. Meanwhile, I was secretly recording conversations using an app Marcus had set up on my phone. I was photographing documents. I was taking screenshots of emails and account statements. I was building a case against my husband that would be irrefutable. The hardest part wasn't the acting. It was the anger. There were moments when I wanted to scream at him, when I wanted to ask him how he could do this to someone he'd promised to love, when I wanted to know if there was any part of him that felt guilty about what he was doing to our family. But I stayed quiet. I stayed patient. I stayed the version of myself that he'd worked so hard to create. It was during this period that I realized something that changed how I understood the entire situation. David wasn't doing this because he loved me. He was doing it because he had never loved me at all. What he loved was the idea of me, the life I could provide, the money my family had given us, the security of having a wife he could control completely. While I was gathering evidence against David, I discovered something that broke me in a different way. Our son, who was 18 at the time, had been helping his father, not voluntarily, not with full understanding of what was happening. But he knew something was wrong with his mother, and he'd been going along with David's narrative. I found an email chain where David had been coaching him on what to say to me, how to respond to my questions in ways that would confuse me further. I didn't blame my son. I still don't. He was a teenager following his father's lead, and his father was a skilled manipulator. But it meant that the conspiracy went deeper than I'd realized. It meant that my own child had been weaponized against me. That's something I've had to work through with a therapist over the last few years. The betrayal of your spouse is profound. The betrayal of your child even if they don't fully understand what they're doing, hits in a completely different place. It makes you question whether you'll ever be able to fully trust anyone ever again. It makes you wonder if the love you gave to your family was genuine on their end, or if it was all theater. That's the lasting damage of this kind of psychological abuse. It poisons not just the present moment, but your ability to trust your own judgment about other people. Marcus had connected me with a lawyer named Sandra Milhouse, who specialized in financial crimes and domestic abuse cases. Sandra was a woman in her 60s who had the kind of controlled energy that comes from seeing the worst parts of human nature repeatedly, and choosing to fight back anyway. When I showed her the documentation I'd gathered, she nodded slowly and said, "He's made mistakes. He thought he was too smart to get caught." The strongest evidence we had was the recording of David and Catherine discussing the scheme in detail. In Connecticut, it's a two-party consent state for recordings, which meant that technically I needed David's consent to record him. But Catherine was in another state, and the law was more complicated there. More importantly, these recordings constituted evidence of criminal activity, and prosecutors have different rules than private citizens. Sandra began the process of handing over the evidence to the Connecticut State Police. She also filed papers to freeze our joint accounts and put holds on the accounts David had opened in my name. What happened next was the most important part of my survival. David had been counting on me staying quiet, on me being too confused or too ashamed to reach out for help. When the letters arrived from the bank and from the state police, his entire carefully constructed world collapsed in a matter of hours. David came home that evening at 6 o'clock, which was his usual time. I was in the kitchen making dinner, performing my role as the confused wife. He looked at me, and I could see the exact moment he realized something was wrong. His face changed. The mask slipped for just a second, and I saw the man who had been orchestrating my destruction. He didn't yell, he didn't become violent. Instead, he became very calm. He said, "Rebecca, what have you done?" I didn't answer. I let him read the papers that Sandra had delivered to the house, the restraining order, the notice that the accounts had been frozen, the information about the criminal investigation. He read each page slowly, and I watched his face go from confusion to understanding to something that looked like panic. And then he did something I didn't expect. He laughed, a short, bitter laugh. He said, "You know what the worst part is? I was going to leave you anyway. All of this was just so I could do it on my terms." That's when I realized that the cruelty went even deeper than the money or the control. He had enjoyed my suffering. He had found pleasure in watching me doubt myself. And he would have continued that for years if I hadn't found that laptop. David moved out that night. He stayed with Catherine, which wasn't really a surprise given what I'd heard in those recordings. The state police investigation took 3 months to complete. During that time, I had to relive every moment of abuse in interviews with detectives. I had to explain to my children what their father had done, which was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. My son cried. My daughter grew angry. They had questions I couldn't answer about why he'd done it or how he could have been so cruel to their mother. I didn't have good answers for them. I still don't. The charges that were filed were numerous: wire fraud, forgery, identity theft, financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud. Catherine was charged as well. She had provided prescription pads and medical documentation. She had helped falsify records. She was someone who was supposed to be bound by an oath to do no harm, and she had actively participated in harming me. The legal process was long and exhausting. There were plea negotiations and trial preparations. There were moments when I questioned whether justice was actually possible or if the system was simply going to move slowly while I continued to suffer. David took a plea deal 6 months before trial. He agreed to plead guilty to 5 of the counts in exchange for a recommendation of 5 to 7 years in prison. It was a deal that made sense from a legal standpoint, but that felt deeply insufficient when I thought about the 8 years of my life that I would never get back. The trial that did happen was the trial of Catherine. She chose to fight the charges, claiming that she had been manipulated by David into assisting him. She claimed that she had believed his narrative, that I was genuinely becoming unstable and that he was simply trying to protect me. No one in that courtroom believed her. The evidence was too clear. The recordings were too explicit. The documentation was too extensive. She was convicted on 3 felony counts and sentenced to 4 years in prison. When the judge read the sentence, I felt something unexpected. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. I felt the weight of all the energy I'd spent trying to understand how people could be so cruel to someone they claim to care about. I felt the lingering questions about my own judgment and my own worth that would take years of therapy to unpack. The divorce process was complicated by the fact that David had hidden so many assets. Sandra and I had to work with forensic accountants to trace money through offshore accounts and shell companies. It took 2 years to settle the divorce, and another year to fully recover the money that David had stolen. During that time, I had to face the practical reality of what it meant to rebuild a life at 39 years old. I had to refinance the house because the deed had been manipulated. I had to get new credit cards and rebuild my credit score. I had to have conversations with my children about trust and accountability and what it means when someone you love chooses to hurt you. What I learned through this process is that rebuilding is not linear. Some days I felt strong and capable. I felt like I'd survived something impossible and come out the other side as a better, more resilient person. Other days, I couldn't sleep because I was replaying conversations in my head. I was second-guessing my own perceptions. I was wondering if I'd somehow missed warning signs, or if there was something I should have done differently. My therapist kept telling me that this was normal, that what I'd experienced was a profound violation of trust and autonomy, and healing from that takes time. If I'm being honest, there are still moments 5 years later when I question whether I can trust my own judgment about people. I'm more cautious now in relationships. I pay attention to small inconsistencies. I notice when someone's words don't match their actions. Some people might call that being paranoid. I call it being awake. What I want to say to anyone watching this who might be in a similar situation is this: your instincts are real. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. You're not crazy for noticing the inconsistencies. You're not oversensitive for being upset about the small betrayals. Trust yourself even when the person you love is telling you that you can't trust yourself. And if you're isolated, if people are suggesting that you're unstable, if there are gaps in your memory that you can't explain, please reach out to someone. Call a friend. Call a family member. Call a therapist or a lawyer or a domestic violence hotline. What happened to me could happen to anyone. It happened to me even though I'm educated. Even though I work in finance and should have recognized fraud. Even though I had resources and family support. It happened because the person I loved was willing to be cruel in ways I couldn't have imagined. But I survived, and I'm still here. The woman I am now is not the same woman I was before David. That woman was trusting in a way that I'll probably never be again. That woman believed that people were generally good, and that love meant you wouldn't hurt someone. That woman would be shocked by what happened to her. But I don't mourn the loss of that naivete. In its place, I have clarity. I have the knowledge that I'm stronger than I thought I was. I have the understanding that survival is not just physical but psychological. I have the deep knowing that I can take care of myself and my children, even when the world feels like it's falling apart around me. I want to end by saying thank you to Marcus, my investigator, and to Sandra, my lawyer. I want to thank my therapist for helping me understand that what happened wasn't my fault, and that I could still trust myself moving forward. I want to thank my family for believing me even when the story I was telling seemed impossible. Most of all, I want to thank myself for choosing to fight back instead of giving in to the confusion and despair. That choice saved my life in ways that are still unfolding. This is Rebecca's story. It's one of many. If you've experienced something similar, if you've survived betrayal or manipulation, please know that you are not alone. Before we go, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.